Setagaya family murder. On the last night of 2000, a family of 4 was preparing for the new millennium in their home in Tokyo's Setagaya ward. Mikio Miyazawa, 44 years old, worked in corporate management. His wife Yasuko, 41, was a teacher. They had 2 young offspring living with them in their 2-story residence in Kamisoshigaya. Between 11:30 in the evening on December 30th and just after midnight on December 31st, someone entered their home. The intruder climbed a fence adjacent to Soshigaya Park and used an air conditioning unit to reach an unlocked second-floor bathroom window. Once inside, the person moved through the house. Mikio was in a downstairs room when he encountered the intruder. A struggle ensued, during which Mikio sustained stab wounds to his head from a sashimi knife. He did not survive the attack. Upstairs, the youngest family member, a young boy named Rei, was in his bedroom. The intruder strangled him in his bed. Yasuko and her daughter Nina were also upstairs. Both sustained multiple stab wounds inflicted with both the broken sashimi knife and a kitchen santoku knife. Neither survived. What happened next made the case extraordinary. The intruder did not immediately leave after taking 4 lives. Instead, the person remained in the house for what investigators estimated to be between 2 and 10 hours. The intruder's activities during this time were meticulously reconstructed through evidence left throughout the home. The person consumed food from the family's kitchen: barley tea, melon, and ice cream. The intruder used the toilet but did not flush, leaving biological evidence. First aid supplies and sanitary products were used to treat injuries to the intruder's hands, apparently sustained during the attacks. At some point, the person apparently took a nap on the sofa. At 1:18 in the morning, someone accessed the family's computer briefly. The intruder went through drawers and personal items, dumping papers into the bathroom and toilet. Before finally leaving, the person stole 150,000 yen in cash. The exit was through the front door, not the window used to enter. On the morning of December 31st, Yasuko's mother, Haruko, arrived at the house at 10:40 and discovered the bodies. She immediately contacted police, launching what would become one of Japan's most extensively investigated unsolved cases. The crime scene yielded an extraordinary amount of physical evidence. Blood samples indicated the intruder had type A blood. Fingerprints were found throughout the house. DNA analysis suggested the perpetrator was male, thin, approximately 170 centimeters tall, right-handed, and likely between 15 and 22 years old at the time. More specifically, DNA indicated mixed ancestry. Paternal lineage showing East Asian markers, and maternal lineage suggesting European, possibly Mediterranean or Caucasus, heritage. This detail suggested someone of mixed racial background, which is relatively uncommon in Japan. Items left at the scene provided additional clues. A sweatshirt was identified as part of a batch of only 130 sold in Japan. A hip bag contained sand that was later determined to match samples from the Nevada desert near Edwards Air Force Base, as well as grains consistent with Japanese skate parks. Shoes left behind were Slazenger brand. A handkerchief carried the scent of Drakkar Noir cologne. Analysis of the biological evidence left in the toilet revealed the intruder's recent diet had included string beans and sesame seeds. Even these specific details have not led to identification. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department mobilized 298,300 officers in the investigation. They received 14,700 tips from the public. Every lead was pursued. DNA was compared against databases. The distinctive items were traced through manufacturing and sales records. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no match has been found. Theories about the intruder's motive have ranged from burglary gone wrong to a targeted attack based on personal resentment. The Nevada Sand connection raised questions about possible links to United States military personnel stationed in Japan, or someone who had recently traveled from the United States. The mixed ancestry suggested in the DNA could support this theory, though many other explanations are possible. In 2021, a person who had purchased a knife similar to those used in the attacks was investigated but cleared through DNA comparison. The incident showed that investigators continue pursuing even tangential leads decades later. In 2013, police created a three-dimensional model of the crime scene to aid in analysis and training. The house itself was eventually demolished in 2019, but all evidence was carefully preserved before the demolition. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department offers a 20 million yen reward for information leading to the perpetrator's arrest. Annual memorials are held for the Miyazawa family. And Eri, a relative of the victims, has spoken publicly about the case, criticizing media sensationalism while appreciating continued attention that might generate new leads. As of 2026, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, TMPD, is led by Hirotaka Ogata. Chief Okabe was a previous official. However, the commitment to solving the case through a dedicated task force of approximately 40 officers remains active. From Tokyo, the mystery shifts to a Colorado trail where a young boy disappeared. Christopher Vigil. On April 30th, 1978, a family was hiking the Gray Rock Mountain Trail in Poudre Canyon, Colorado. Marion Vigil was with her two sons, enjoying the spring weather along Highway 14. Christopher William Vigil, a 9-year-old boy, was energetic and excited about the hike. Around 2 in the afternoon, Christopher moved ahead of his mother and younger brother on the trail. Christopher was carrying a regular Pepsi and wearing distinctive clothing: a green shirt, plaid pants, blue sneakers, and a maroon jacket. His mother could see him ahead on the trail initially. The path was well marked and frequently used by hikers. Christopher was not going far ahead, just maintaining a faster pace than his mother, who was walking with his 4-year-old brother Eric. Then Christopher was no longer visible on the trail ahead. Marion called for him, but received no response. She quickened her pace, expecting to round a bend and see him waiting, but when she reached the point where she should have caught up to him, Christopher was not there. He had vanished from the trail. Marion immediately contacted park rangers and law enforcement. Search and rescue teams were deployed quickly. The area where Christopher disappeared was challenging terrain: forested mountainside with steep drops, streams, and numerous places where someone could become lost or injured. But it was also a maintained trail where a 9-year-old should not simply vanish. Searchers combed the area around the trail. They found no trace of Christopher, no dropped items, no footprints leaving the trail, nothing to indicate where he might have gone. The Diet Pepsi can he had been carrying was never found. His distinctive clothing should have made him visible in the forest, but search teams saw no sign of him. Then witnesses came forward with troubling information. 2 people reported seeing a young boy matching Christopher's description in the company of an unidentified adult man. The sightings occurred after Christopher disappeared from the trail. The descriptions of the boy's clothing matched what Christopher had been wearing. But the man with him was not recognized, and neither Christopher nor the man was located despite these reports. Did Christopher encounter someone on the trail who took him? The sightings raised the possibility of abduction. Perhaps someone had been on the trail, encountered Christopher walking alone, and persuaded or forced him to leave with them. The 2 witness reports of seeing Christopher with an unknown adult suggested this was not simply a case of getting lost. But without finding Christopher or the man, investigators could not confirm this theory. Another possibility was exposure. The Colorado mountains in late April can have unpredictable weather. with temperatures dropping significantly, especially at night. If Christopher had left the trail, whether voluntarily, by accident, or while trying to take a shortcut, he could have become disoriented quickly. Without proper equipment or shelter, a 9-year-old would be vulnerable to hypothermia. Searches continued for days, then weeks. Hundreds of volunteers joined professional search and rescue teams. They covered vast areas of the Poudre Canyon, checking every ravine, every cluster of rocks, every place where a body might be concealed or where someone might have sought shelter. Helicopters provided aerial surveillance. Search dogs were brought in to track any scent. Despite these comprehensive efforts, Christopher was not found. The case grew cold. Investigators pursued leads as they emerged, but without physical evidence or confirmed sightings that led anywhere, the trail went nowhere. Christopher's brother, Eric Vigil, has led the family's search efforts since the passing of their mother, Marion Vigil, in the late 2010s. More than 45 years have passed since Christopher disappeared on that Colorado trail. The Grey Rock Mountain area continues to be popular with hikers. Occasionally, someone familiar with Christopher's case will conduct informal searches, hoping that new eyes or changed terrain might reveal something previous searchers missed. The wilderness that was supposed to be a pleasant family outing became the site of an enduring mystery. Whether Christopher left the trail voluntarily, encountered someone who took him, or suffered an accident that has kept him hidden for decades remains unknown. His family has lived with the absence of answers, unable to achieve closure or understand what happened during those minutes when Christopher moved ahead on the trail and disappeared. From a mountain trail to a suburban street. The next case involves a toddler who vanished from a car. Sky Metalwala. In Bellevue, Washington, on November 6, 2011, a mother reported that her young son had vanished. Julia Biryukova called authorities, claiming that her car had run out of gas and that when she returned with fuel, Sky Metalwala, a toddler, was no longer in the vehicle. She said she had left him in the car with his older sister while she walked about a mile to a gas station. Police responded to the reported disappearance immediately. When they examined the vehicle, they found it had plenty of fuel. The car had not run out of gas. Julia's explanation for why she left the car did not match the physical evidence. This discrepancy immediately raised suspicions about what had actually happened. Julia's account of events also contained other inconsistencies. She claimed to have walked to a gas station, but the timeline she provided did not align with the distance and her reported movements. She said Sky had been asleep in the car when she left and was gone when she returned. But the car had not been broken into, and there was no evidence anyone else had approached the vehicle. Investigators interviewed Julia extensively. She was in the midst of a custody dispute with Sky's father, Solomon Metalwala. The divorce and custody proceedings had been contentious. Solomon had expressed concerns about Julia's care of the young ones, and court documents reflected ongoing conflict between the parents. Sky's older sister, who Julia claimed had been in the car with Sky, was too young to provide a reliable account of what happened. Investigators could not determine from the sibling whether Sky had actually been in the car that morning or what had occurred. The physical evidence from the car was examined thoroughly. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The vehicle contained Sky's car seat, but forensic examination provided limited information about when Sky had last been in the car. Without witnesses who saw Sky in the vehicle that morning, investigators could not confirm Julia's account that he had been there. Police conducted extensive searches of the area around where the car had been parked. They checked nearby locations where a toddler might wander or where someone might have taken him. They reviewed surveillance footage from businesses and residences in the area. They found no evidence of Sky leaving the car, being taken from the car or being anywhere in the vicinity that morning. Investigators turned their focus to Julia and her movements before reporting Skye missing. They examined her phone records, financial transactions, and travel patterns. They conducted searches of locations Julia had access to, looking for any indication of what might have happened to Skye. The investigation suggested that whatever occurred likely happened before Julia drove to the location where she claimed the car ran out of gas. Solomon Metalwala cooperated fully with investigators. He had not seen Skye for some time due to the custody arrangements. He maintained that Julia was responsible for whatever had happened to Skye. He participated in media appeals, asking anyone with information to come forward. But he could provide no specific information about Skye's whereabouts, as he had not been present during the events Julia described. The custody dispute provided a possible context for motive. In contentious custody cases, parents sometimes take extreme measures to prevent the other parent from having access to the offspring. Whether Julia had harmed Skye to prevent Solomon from gaining custody, or whether something else had happened, remained a question investigators pursued. As of 2026, Skye Metalwala has never been found. No physical evidence has been discovered indicating what happened to him. While Julia Biryukova has never been charged with Skye's disappearance, she was investigated and later hospitalized for psychiatric reasons following the event. In 2024, the Bellevue Police Department confirmed they are now using forensic genetic genealogy to compare Skye's DNA against unidentified remains found across the Pacific Northwest. The case has become one of Washington State's most frustrating unsolved disappearances. Law enforcement believes Julia knows what happened to Skye, but has not provided truthful information. Without her cooperation and without physical evidence, determining Skye's fate has proven impossible. The investigation remains technically active, with periodic reviews and pursuit of any new leads that emerge. While Skye's disappearance centered on a mother's account, the next case would begin with the targeting of an entire family. Jennifer Short. In Henry County, Virginia, on August 15, 2002, sheriff's deputies responded to a home after concerned family members requested a welfare check. Michael and Mary Short had not been answering phone calls, and relatives worried something was wrong. When deputies entered the home, they found Michael and Mary deceased in their bed. Both had been shot execution style. The couple's daughter, Jennifer Short, was not in the home. Her absence immediately raised alarm. Had she fled during the attack? Had she been taken? Was she hiding somewhere in terror? Deputies searched the property and surrounding area, calling for Jennifer and looking for any sign of her. She was not found. The crime scene showed no signs of forced entry. Michael and Mary appeared to have been in their bedroom, likely sleeping, when someone entered and shot them. The manner of the attack, shooting both while they were in bed, suggested the perpetrator knew where they would be. This was not a spontaneous act, but rather an execution. The family's vehicle was missing from the property. This discovery suggested whoever was responsible had taken the car, possibly with Jennifer inside it. An immediate search was launched for the vehicle, with law enforcement across Virginia and surrounding states alerted to be looking for the car and for any sign of Jennifer. Days later, on August 21st, Jennifer's body was discovered in Rockingham County, North Carolina, approximately 45 miles from the Short family home. She had been shot. The family's vehicle was found abandoned nearby. Jennifer had been taken from her home, transported to another state, and her life had been ended there. Why would someone target an entire family? Investigators examined every aspect of Michael and Mary's lives, looking for enemies, conflicts, or situations that might lead to such targeted attacks. Michael worked in a stable profession. Mary was active in the community. The family had no obvious involvement in activities that would make them targets. They were not wealthy, eliminating robbery as a primary motive. They had no known disputes with neighbors or associates that would explain such actions. The investigation generated numerous leads, but none led to arrests. Police interviewed hundreds of people, family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, anyone who might have information. They examined Michael's work relationships and Mary's social connections. They looked into the family's finances and personal history. Nothing provided a clear motive or identified a suspect. Forensic evidence from the scenes in Virginia and North Carolina was analyzed extensively. Ballistics experts examined the weapons used. Medical examiners determined the sequence of events and timing. DNA evidence was collected and compared against databases. The forensic work confirmed what investigators already knew. This was a planned, targeted attack on the family, but it did not reveal who was responsible. The case has remained active for more than 2 decades. Investigators continue pursuing leads, re-interviewing witnesses, and examining evidence with new technologies. They have revisited the case files multiple times, hoping that something overlooked initially will take on new significance with fresh eyes. Annual memorial motorcycle rides are held in honor of the Short family. These events keep the case in public awareness and demonstrate community support for finding justice. Participants include family members, friends, and people who never knew the Shorts but are moved by their story and the lack of resolution. The Henry County Sheriff's Office has indicated that persons of interest have been identified over the years, but evidence sufficient for charges has not materialized. The investigation requires not just knowing who was responsible, but proving it beyond reasonable doubt. Without witnesses to the attacks and with limited physical evidence linking specific individuals to the crimes, building a prosecutable case has proven impossible. As of 2026, the Short family case remains unsolved. Michael, Mary, and Jennifer Short have been gone for more than 20 years, their lives taken in attacks that made no sense to those who knew them. Investigators remain committed to finding answers, but time works against them as witnesses age, memories fade, and the urgency of the immediate aftermath diminishes. From Virginia to Maryland, the next case involves a man whose passing was classified one way, but questioned by those who knew him. Ray Rivera. In Baltimore, Maryland, a man went missing on May 16, 2006. Ray Rivera, 32 years old, left his home after receiving a phone call. He told his wife Allison he was going out but did not specify where or why. That would be the last time Allison saw him alive. When Ray did not return and could not be reached, his family became increasingly concerned. On May 24th, 8 days after Ray disappeared, his body was found. He was discovered in a room at the Belvedere Hotel in Baltimore. The room was accessed through a hole in the roof. Someone or something had crashed through from above. Ray's body was found in a second-story meeting room inside the Belvedere Hotel's annex and parking garage. The hole was located in the roof of this lower annex, not the main roof of the 14-story hotel tower. Medical examiners classified Ray's passing as probable self-inflicted, concluding he had jumped from the hotel roof. The hole in the roof and Ray's position in the room below seemed consistent with a fall or jump from above. But Ray's family and friends immediately questioned this conclusion. They insisted Ray showed no signs of planning to end his own life. The circumstances raised significant questions. Ray's belongings, including his glasses, wallet, and cell phone, were found near his body and appeared undamaged. If someone had fallen from a height sufficient to crash through a roof, Their personal items should have been damaged or scattered. The fact that these items were intact and neatly placed seemed inconsistent with the fall theory. A note was found in Ray's home, tucked inside his computer. The note contained cryptic messages, references to various topics, and language that seemed disconnected and strange. Some interpreted it as evidence of mental distress. Others saw it as something written for a different purpose entirely, perhaps related to Ray's work. The note's meaning remained ambiguous and subject to interpretation. Ray worked in finance, creating reports and analyses for a company. Some theorized his work might have put him in contact with information that made him a target. The company he worked for operated in areas where confidentiality was crucial. Had Ray discovered something he should not have? Had his work created a situation where someone wanted him silenced? These theories suggested foul play rather than a self-inflicted passing. The call was traced to the Stansberry and Associates switchboard. But because the company used a shared extension system, investigators could never identify the specific individual who placed the call. And a company-wide non-disclosure agreement prevented employees from discussing the matter with the media. This silence raised questions about what Ray was told that made him leave his home so suddenly and what might have happened after he left. Physical evidence from the Belvedere Hotel was limited. The route Ray would have had to take to reach the roof was not clearly established. The hotel's security and access systems should have recorded someone going to the roof, but no such evidence was found. How Ray accessed the roof, if indeed he did, remained unexplained. The distance from the roof to where the hole was located presented another problem. Engineers and forensic experts who examined the scene questioned whether someone jumping from the roof could have created a hole in that particular location. The trajectory seemed inconsistent with a direct fall. Would someone jumping from that height land where Ray was found? Or would physics suggest a different impact point? Alison Rivera and Ray's family have consistently maintained that the self-inflicted classification is wrong. They argue that Ray had no history of mental health issues, no indication he was planning to harm himself, and no reason to suddenly end his life. They believe he was either harmed by someone else or his passing was staged to appear self-inflicted. The case gained widespread attention when it was featured in a streaming documentary series. The publicity generated new tips and renewed interest in finding answers. Some who had not previously spoken about what they knew came forward. But despite this renewed attention, no definitive explanation has emerged for what happened to Ray Rivera. As of 2026, the case remains officially classified as probable self-inflicted, though that classification is disputed. The Baltimore Police Department maintains that the evidence supports the original conclusion. Ray's family continues advocating for the case to be investigated as a potential homicide, believing that critical questions remain unanswered and that the official explanation does not account for all the evidence. While Ray's case divided official conclusions from family beliefs, the next would begin with a young person leaving home in a storm. Asha Degree. In Shelby, North Carolina, a young person left her home during a powerful storm in the early morning hours of February 14, 2000. Asha Degree, 9 years old, walked out of her house while her family slept. The weather was terrible. Heavy rain, strong winds, temperatures near freezing. It was not weather that would draw someone outside willingly, especially not in the middle of the night. Around 4 in the morning, 2 different motorists reported seeing a young person walking along Highway 18. The person was moving south, away from Asha's home. The drivers noticed because it was so unusual. A young individual out alone on a highway in the middle of a stormy night. One driver turned around to check on the person, but when they approached, The individual ran into the woods alongside the highway and disappeared. When Asha's family woke that morning and found her gone, they immediately contacted police. Searches began along Highway 18 and Swat, the woods where the motorists had seen someone flee. Despite intensive searching, Asha was not found. The storm had made conditions difficult for searchers, but teams combed through the area methodically. A year and a half later, in August 2001, Asha's backpack was found. The discovery location was approximately 26 miles from where she was last seen. The backpack was wrapped in plastic and buried. The deliberate concealment suggested someone had taken Asha's belongings and hidden them. Inside the backpack were some of Asha's personal items, providing confirmation it was hers, but offering no immediate clues about what had happened to her. Why would a 9-year-old leave home in the middle of a terrible storm? Investigators examined Asha's life for any indication of what might have prompted her to leave. Her family said she was not troubled, had no reason to run away, and would not normally go outside alone at night. School records and interviews with teachers showed a well-adjusted student with no apparent problems. Friends and classmates could think of no reason Asha would leave home like that. The theory that Asha was meeting someone became central to the investigation. Perhaps she had been contacted by someone she knew or trusted, someone who convinced her to leave her house and meet them. The fact that she fled when a motorist approached suggested she was either afraid or had been instructed not to talk to anyone. This behavior indicated she might have been under someone's influence or following instructions. In September 2024, investigators executed major search warrants at a property in Shelby, North Carolina, seizing a 1960s model Rambler car and removing multiple items for forensic testing. As of 2026, authorities have confirmed they are investigating specific local individuals, but the text message admissions remain an unverified rumor from early social media reports. DNA. Evidence collected from items found near where Asha was last seen has been linked to specific individuals. A vehicle became a focus of the investigation. Investigators identified a specific car they believe was involved in Asha's disappearance. The owner of the vehicle and associates have been subjects of intensive investigation. While no arrests have been publicly announced, the investigation has narrowed significantly to specific individuals. The reward for information leading to resolution of Asha's case has been increased to $100,000. The substantial amount reflects both the seriousness of the case and the belief that someone in the community knows what happened. The proximity of the individuals being investigated to Asha's life suggests this was not a stranger abduction, but rather someone known to her or her family. In September 2024, the FBI and Cleveland County Sheriff's Office executed major search warrants on Cherryville Road, Shelby, seizing a 1960s model green Rambler car. While the search was a major breakthrough, authorities have not officially confirmed the discovery of admissions of guilt via text messages. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office has conducted multiple searches of properties connected to persons of interest. Items have been seized and are being analyzed forensically. The investigation has taken on renewed intensity, with authorities clearly believing they have identified those responsible for Asha's disappearance. For Asha's family, the 25 years since she left home have been consumed by unanswered questions. The recent developments offer hope that finally, after a quarter century, they will learn what happened to their daughter. The suggestion that people in their community may have known what happened all along makes the lack of earlier resolution even more painful. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From North Carolina to Texas, the next case involves a discovery in a home that shocked investigators. Icebox murders. In Houston, Texas, on June 23, 1965, neighbors noticed something was wrong at the Rogers family home. Fred and Edwina Rogers had not been seen for several days. Their adult son Charles had also not appeared at work or been in contact with associates. Concerned individuals contacted police, requesting a welfare check on the elderly couple. When officers entered the home, they found human remains in the refrigerator. Fred and Edwina Rogers had been dismembered. Their bodies had been carefully cut apart and stored in the household appliance. The crime scene was methodical and disturbing, suggesting whoever was responsible had spent considerable time and effort in the disposal of the bodies. Charles Rogers, the couple's son, was nowhere to be found. He had not been seen since around the time his parents presumably passed. His disappearance immediately made him the primary suspect. The investigation focused on locating Charles and determining whether he was responsible for what had happened to Fred and Edwina. Charles had a complex background. He was educated and had worked in professional capacities. But his relationship with his parents was complicated. Some who knew the family suggested tensions existed within the household. Whether these tensions escalated to the point of leading to such extreme actions became a central question. Financial records showed unusual activity around the time of the passings. Documents had been manipulated, including deeds and financial instruments. The forgeries suggested someone was attempting to gain control of Fred and Edwina's assets. The timing of these forgeries coinciding with the passings pointed toward a financial motive for the crimes. Investigators pursued Charles Rogers across state lines. Sightings and potential leads placed him in various locations, but none were confirmed. Some reports suggested he had fled to Mexico. Others indicated he might have remained in the United States under an assumed identity. Despite nationwide alerts and extensive investigation, Charles was never located. Theories about Charles's fate ranged from continued hiding to having taken his own life to avoid capture. Some investigators believed he escaped successfully and lived under a new identity for years. Others thought the stress and guilt might have led him to end his own life in a location where his body was never found. The lack of any confirmed sightings or contact with known associates suggested either very effective hiding or that Charles himself had passed. More exotic theories suggested Charles had connections to intelligence agencies and that his disappearance was facilitated by those connections. These theories lacked substantial evidence, but reflected the mystery surrounding how someone could vanish so completely despite being the subject of intensive law enforcement attention. The Rogers home and its contents were examined thoroughly. Beyond the remains in the refrigerator, investigators found evidence of the family's life and Charles's activities. Personal papers, photographs, and other items provided insight into family dynamics, but did not explain definitively why events unfolded as they did. As of 2026, more than 60 years after the Icebox murders, Charles Rogers has never been found. The case remains technically open, though active investigation has long since ceased. If Charles survived his flight, he would now be extremely elderly or more likely deceased from natural causes. The likelihood of ever confirming what happened to him diminishes with each passing year. From Texas to California, where 5 men vanished after a basketball game. Yuba County 5. In Chico, California, on February 24, 1978, 5 men attended a college basketball game. Gary Mathias, 32 years old, Jack Madruga, 30, William Sterling, 29, Jack Hewitt, 24, and Ted Wire, 32, were friends who enjoyed watching sports together. After the game ended around 10 in the evening, they left in Madruga's car to return home. That was the last time anyone saw all 5 men alive. The men never arrived at their homes that night. When families could not reach them the next day, concern grew quickly. Police were contacted, and a search began for the 5 missing men and Madruga's vehicle. The route from Chico to their home area was straightforward, making their disappearance all the more puzzling. Days later, Madruga's car was found on a mountain road near Rogers Cow Camp, approximately 70 miles from where they should have been. The vehicle was stuck in snow on a remote forest road. This discovery was shocking. The location was completely off any logical route home. How had they ended up on a mountain road in winter conditions when they were simply driving home from a basketball game? The car showed no signs of mechanical problems. It had fuel. The men had simply abandoned it in the snow and apparently walked away. Their abandoned vehicle sparked an intensive search of the surrounding area. The Plumas National Forest in winter was treacherous, with deep snow, freezing temperatures, and numerous places where people could become lost or succumb to exposure. Months passed before the grim discoveries began. Ted Weiher's body was found in a Forest Service trailer about 19 miles from where the car had been abandoned. The trailer was stocked with survival supplies, food, propane, blankets, but most of these supplies had not been used. Weiher had apparently been in the trailer for weeks, but he had consumed very little of the available food and had not properly utilized the heating sources. Medical examination suggested he survived for 8 to 13 weeks in the trailer before succumbing to exposure and starvation. The remains of other members of the group were found in the forest. Jack Madruga, William Sterling, and Jack Hewitt did not survive. Their bodies were located in areas suggesting they had wandered through the forest, eventually succumbing to the harsh conditions. None were found near the trailer where Weiher had been. Gary Mathias was never found. Despite extensive searches, no trace of him was discovered. Whether he wandered farther than the others and perished in a location that has not been searched, or whether something else happened to him, remains unknown. Why had they driven to that remote location? Investigators examined various theories. One possibility was that they took a wrong turn, perhaps while looking for a shortcut or while confused about directions. The mountain road where their car was found was not clearly marked, and in darkness and potentially snowy conditions, they could have made a navigation error that proved fatal. Gary Mathias had a history of mental health issues, including schizophrenia. Some theorized that he might have been experiencing symptoms that led to confusion or poor decision-making. If Mathias was driving or giving directions, his mental state could have influenced the group's actions. But this theory was complicated by the fact that 4 other men were present, and it seemed unlikely they would all follow directions that were clearly wrong without questioning them. The mystery of why Ted Weiher did not use the survival supplies in the trailer where he was found added another layer of confusion. The trailer had food, heat, and shelter. Everything needed to survive until rescue arrived. Why had Weiher not eaten the food or properly used the propane heater? Medical conditions like hypothermia can cause confusion and poor judgment, but the extent of his non-use of available resources seemed extreme. In 2020, internal law enforcement documents classified Gary Mathias's case as a homicide rather than a missing person or death by exposure. This classification suggested authorities believed foul play was involved in Mathias's disappearance. But the documents did not publicly reveal what evidence led to this determination or who might have been responsible. A Netflix docuseries released in 2025 examined the case. The renewed attention brought family members back into public discussion, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. The families emphasized that many questions remained unanswered and that they still sought understanding of what happened to their loved ones. While the Yuba County Five died in a forest, the next family met their end in their Illinois trailer home. Dardeen family. In Ena, Illinois, on November 18th, 1987, a horrific discovery was made. Keith Dardeen had not reported to work, and concerned co-workers asked police to check on the family. Officers entered the Dardeens' mobile home and found Keith's wife Elaine, their young son, and Elaine's newborn deceased. All had sustained severe injuries from blunt force trauma. The brutality of the scene was extreme and disturbing. Keith was not in the mobile home. His body was found later that day along a nearby road. He had been shot multiple times. The evidence suggested Keith had returned home from work, encountered whoever had harmed his family, and was then taken from the mobile home and shot. The crime scene provided limited clues about who was responsible. There was no evidence of forced entry. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. The attack seemed to serve no obvious purpose beyond the infliction of harm itself. This randomness or motiveless quality made the crime especially difficult to understand and investigate. Forensic analysis determined the sequence of events and the approximate timing. The attack on Elaine and the offspring occurred first, likely while Keith was at work. The newborn had been delivered during or shortly before the attack, suggesting Elaine had gone into labor. Whether the birth prompted the perpetrator to act or was coincidental to the timing remains unknown. The weapon used in the blunt force attacks was never recovered. Investigators believed it was a bat or similar implement. The weapon would have been covered in biological evidence after the attacks, meaning whoever used it either cleaned it extensively or disposed of it in a location where it has never been found. Why would someone commit such acts against a family with no apparent connection to criminal activity or dangerous situations? Keith worked at a water treatment plant. Elaine was a homemaker caring for their young family. They had recently moved to Illinois from elsewhere, meaning they had not established deep roots or long-standing relationships in the area. This transience made it less likely the attack stemmed from local conflicts or long-standing disputes. They were relative newcomers, making them unlikely targets of someone with a personal grudge. Years after the incident, a man named Tommy Lynn Sells confessed to the Dardeen family attacks. Sells was a confirmed serial offender who traveled extensively and committed numerous crimes across the United States. He confessed to many incidents, including the Dardeens. However, investigators found inconsistencies in Sells's confession. Details he provided did not match known facts about the crime scene. He appeared to be confessing to crimes he had not committed, perhaps for notoriety or other reasons. Sells was executed in 2014 for a separate confirmed case. His passing meant he could not be questioned further about the Dardeen case or any other crimes he may or may not have committed. Investigators who examined his confession remained skeptical that he was actually responsible for the Dardeen family attacks. FBI profilers who examined the Dardeen case found the crime defied typical patterns. The level and nature of the attacks did not fit established profiles of serial offenders or typical family annihilators. The lack of robbery, the apparent randomness, and the specific details of what was done made the case unusual even among horrific crimes. This uniqueness suggested either a perpetrator whose behavior did not fit known patterns or a specific motive that was not apparent to investigators. Evidence from the case has been preserved and is stored with law enforcement. As DNA technology advances, there is hope that biological evidence from the scene might eventually be matched against databases or provide leads that were not possible with earlier forensic methods. But as of 2026, no match has been made and no suspect has been identified. From Illinois to Panama, where two hikers entered a jungle trail and never returned. Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. In Panama in April 2014, two Dutch young women arrived for a planned stay. Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, both in their early 20s, were spending time in Boquete, a town known for its hiking trails and natural beauty. On April 1st, they set out to hike the Pianista Trail, a popular route for tourists. They were seen beginning the hike in the late morning. They never returned. When Chris and Lisanne failed to meet their tour guide as planned on April 2nd, concern grew quickly. Search efforts began, with local authorities and volunteers combing the trail and surrounding jungle. The Pianista Trail was well-traveled, and the women were experienced hikers. Their disappearance seemed unlikely given the conditions and their backgrounds. Days turned into weeks with no sign of the women. Then, 10 weeks after they vanished, a local woman found Lisanne's backpack near a riverbank. The backpack was in relatively good condition, considering it had apparently been exposed to jungle conditions for months. Inside were items belonging to both women, their phones, a camera, and personal belongings. The phones revealed that distress calls had been attempted starting on April 1st, just hours after the women began their hike. Multiple calls to emergency services were made, but did not connect. The calls continued sporadically for several days, suggesting the women were lost and attempting to get help, but could not reach anyone. The phone data showed the devices being turned on and off, presumably to conserve battery power. Photographs on the camera provided eerie documentation of their final days. Early photos showed Chris and Lisanne on the trail, smiling and enjoying their hike. Then there was a gap of hours. The next series of photos, taken at night, showed nothing but darkness with occasional glimpses of jungle, rocks, and river. The photos seemed random, taken every few seconds or minutes, as if someone was using the camera flash to provide light or was signaling for help. Eventually, remains belonging to both women were found scattered in the jungle. The condition and location of the remains raised questions. The 2014 forensic pathology report concluded that the recovered remains showed no signs of tool marks or trauma, consistent with severing, attributing the scattering of the bones to the high-velocity flow of the Culebra River during the rainy season. The dispersal pattern seemed unusual, with remains found in locations that did not obviously connect to the trail or to each other. The official conclusion was that Chris and Lisanne became lost on the trail, wandered into the jungle, and perished due to exposure, injury, and inability to find their way back. The night photos were interpreted as attempts to use the camera flash for illumination while moving through darkness. The scattered remains were attributed to natural processes and possibly animals moving the bodies after initial decomposition. But questions persisted. In 2025, new analysis revealed anomalies in the digital evidence. Photo number 509 was found to be deleted from the camera, with the deletion occurring after the last photos were taken. The deleted photo was between the day photos and the night photos, suggesting something significant might have been captured and then deliberately removed. Phone data analysis showed attempts to enter incorrect PIN codes, suggesting someone other than the owners was trying to access the devices. Whether this occurred while the women were still alive or after they had passed remained unclear. But the pattern suggested tampering or attempts to access information on the phones. The condition of some remains, particularly the severing of certain bones, raised questions about whether natural decomposition and animal activity could fully explain the state of the bodies. Forensic experts who examined the remains had differing opinions. Some believed the condition was consistent with natural processes in the jungle environment. Others thought the evidence suggested human intervention. Books and podcasts released in 2025 examined the evidence in detail. These analyses suggested that the evidence might have been manipulated, that the official conclusion of accidental passing might not account for all the facts, and that foul play could not be ruled out. The digital anomalies especially, the deleted photo and the PIN entry attempts, suggested someone had accessed the devices after Chris and Lisanne could no longer use them themselves. As of 2026, The case remains officially closed, with the conclusion that the women became lost and perished. But families and investigators continue to question whether this explanation accounts for all the evidence. The digital tampering revelations, the condition of the remains, and the scattered nature of the discovery locations keep alternative theories alive. Whether Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon died from tragic misadventure, or whether something more sinister occurred in that Panamanian jungle, remains a matter of debate and investigation. Elizabeth Short. On January 15, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was discovered in a vacant lot in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. The remains had been severed at the waist through a surgical procedure known as hemicorporectomy, with the body completely drained of blood and positioned with arms raised above the head and legs spread apart. The face bore deep slashes extending from the corners of the mouth toward the ears, creating what investigators termed a Glasgow smile. Flesh had been removed from the thighs and chest area, and ligature marks indicated the victim had been bound during the attack. The medical examiner determined the cause of passing to be cerebral hemorrhage resulting from blows to the head, combined with shock from the extensive injuries sustained. Elizabeth Short had been born in 1924 in Boston and had relocated to California with aspirations of pursuing work in Hollywood entertainment. She lived a transient lifestyle, moving between residences and maintaining various social connections in the Los Angeles area. The media nicknamed her the Black Dahlia, due to her preference for dark clothing and her fondness for flowers, particularly dahlias. She was last seen alive on January 9, 1947, in the company of her boyfriend, Robert Manley, who was subsequently cleared of involvement through alibi verification. The Los Angeles Police Department investigation involved interviews with over 150 suspects and processing of 60 false confessions, demonstrating the massive public interest the case generated and the challenges investigators faced in sorting credible leads from attention-seeking individuals. Physical evidence collected included a handbag and shoe that had been cleaned of fingerprints and were discovered near the body. An envelope containing Short's birth certificate, social security card, and photographs was sent to a Los Angeles newspaper, with investigators believing the perpetrator had sent these items to generate additional publicity. Investigators noted the precision of the bisection and the manner in which blood had been drained from the body, leading to theories that the perpetrator possessed medical or mortuary knowledge. This observation generated focus on individuals with anatomical expertise, including physicians and mortuary workers. Several theories emerged connecting Short's case to other unsolved incidents, including the Cleveland torso murders, which involved similar dismemberment techniques, and a series of cases in Los Angeles referred to as the Lone Woman murders. Several individuals emerged as suspects during the investigation and in subsequent decades. George Hodel, a physician, drew attention when his son Steve Hodel later claimed wiretap recordings from the 1950s captured his father making incriminating statements, including, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia." However, these recordings were never presented as evidence in criminal proceedings. Leslie Dillon, a former mortuary assistant, was detained for questioning but released when alibis could not be definitively disproven. Mark Hansen, who owned a residence where Short had stayed, was investigated based on theories he had made advances she rejected. In 2025, an amateur researcher named Alex Baber proposed a theory connecting Short's case to the Zodiac killings through analysis of cryptographic messages attributed to the Zodiac. Baber's interpretation suggested a cipher decoded to reference Marvin Merrill, which he identified as an alias used by a suspect named Marvin Margolis. Baber noted that Margolis had shared living quarters with Short and that a 1992 sketch of a suspect in related cases resembled the pattern of mutilation inflicted on Short. while Alex Baber and his team claim to have utilized forensic document examiners and independent specialists to verify the decoding of the Zodiac's Z13 cipher as Marvin Merrill, the National Security Agency, NSA, has not officially confirmed or verified this decoding, as the agency typically does not provide public authentication for amateur solutions to civilian cold cases. A reporter for the Los Angeles Examiner was quoted stating, "This is the best story since the war," reflecting the intense media attention the case generated. The nickname Black Dahlia was coined by journalists rather than being a name Short used for herself, demonstrating how media coverage shaped public perception of the case. The investigation has never resulted in criminal charges, and the case remains officially unsolved. The cultural impact has been substantial, inspiring numerous books, films, and continued amateur investigation efforts throughout the decades since 1947. The next case would involve an entire family targeted in their home. The Keddie Cabin Murders. Between the evening of April 11th and the morning of April 12th, 1981, at Cabin 28 in the Keddie Resort community in California, 4 individuals were taken in a brutal attack. The victims were Glenna Sue Sharp, her son John, her daughter Tina, and John's friend Dana Wingate. The perpetrator or perpetrators bound the victims with electrical tape and cords before inflicting fatal injuries through stabbing, beating with hammers, and strangulation. Sue Sharp was found gagged and partially unclothed, while Tina Sharp was not located at the cabin but had been taken from the scene. Sue's younger sons and a friend had been sleeping in a nearby bedroom and were not harmed during the attack. The scene was discovered on the morning of April 12th when Sue's daughter Sheila returned to the cabin and found the bodies in the living room. The positioning of the victims and the implements used in the attack indicated prolonged violence rather than rapid execution. Tina Sharp's skull was discovered 3 years later in 1984 at a location called Camp 18, establishing that she had been removed from the cabin alive, but had subsequently been taken elsewhere. The discovery of her remains provided confirmation of her fate, but raised additional questions about the perpetrator's movements and whether she had been held at an intermediate location before being taken to the discovery site. 2 individuals emerged as primary suspects: Martin Smart, who lived in a neighboring cabin, and John Bo Bubede, who had been staying with Smart and had a criminal history. A therapist reported that Smart had made statements during counseling sessions that could be interpreted as confessions, including, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." This statement was interpreted as potentially referring to the Sharp family, though Smart never faced charges before his passing. Bubede was documented providing false statements during interviews with investigators, though he similarly was never charged before his demise. A claw hammer that had been missing from Smart's residence was believed to match one of the weapons used in the attack, and a hammer was recovered in 2016 during renewed investigation efforts. The recovery of this potential murder weapon decades after the original crime demonstrated both the value of preserving evidence and the challenges of solving cases when crucial physical evidence is not located during initial investigation phases. Forensic testing of the hammer was conducted to determine if biological evidence remained that could be analyzed with contemporary DNA techniques. The motive for the attack has been theorized to involve Smart's domestic situation. Sue Sharp had reportedly counseled Smart's wife about leaving the marriage due to difficulties in the relationship. Investigators explored whether Smart had developed animosity towards Sue based on her involvement in his marital issues, leading him to target her and those present in the cabin that evening. A witness named Justin, who had been present in the cabin, provided descriptions of 2 male intruders under hypnosis during later interviews, though the reliability of hypnosis-assisted testimony has been questioned by forensic experts. In 2018, Sheriff Greg Hagwood confirmed that DNA recovered from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched a living person of interest. But investigators have clarified that a DNA match in a social setting, like a resort cabin, does not necessarily prove criminal culpability, which is why no charges have been filed as of late 2025. The delay between the DNA match and potential charges has generated frustration among family members seeking resolution. The case remains officially open, with the Plumas County Sheriff's Office maintaining that investigation continues despite the passage of over 4 decades since the original incident. But some disappearances leave no crime scene to investigate. Amelia Earhart. On July 2, 1937, aviator Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan vanished during an attempt to circumnavigate the globe by air. They had departed from Lae, New Guinea, and were attempting to locate Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean for refueling when radio contact was lost. The final transmission received stated, "We are on the line, 157-337. We are running on line north and south," indicating they were following a navigational line but had not successfully located the island. The United States Navy and Coast Guard conducted what became the largest search operation in American history to that point, expending approximately $4 million in 1937 currency, but recovered no trace of the aircraft or its occupants. Earhart had been born in 1897 in Atchison, Kansas, and had become the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean in 1932. Her accomplishments in aviation made her an international celebrity, and her attempt at a round-the-world flight was heavily publicized. The flight plan required multiple refueling stops across continents and oceans, with each leg presenting navigational challenges given the technology available in the 1930s. The attempt to locate Howland Island, a tiny landmass in the vast Pacific, represented one of the most difficult segments of the journey. The most widely accepted theory among aviation experts and historians is that Earhart and Noonan failed to locate Howland Island due to navigational errors compounded by weather conditions and fuel exhaustion, resulting in the aircraft crashing into the ocean. The depth of the Pacific in the area where they were believed to be flying would have prevented recovery of wreckage using 1930s technology, and the dispersal of debris by ocean currents would have eliminated surface evidence within days of any crash. Alternative theories have been proposed throughout the decades since 1937. The castaway hypothesis suggests Earhart and Noonan may have landed on Gardner Island, now known as Nikomaroro, and survived for a period as castaways before succumbing to exposure or lack of resources. While TIGHAR researchers claim a piece of aluminum, patch 22V1, matches Earhart's Electra, and a 2018 forensic analysis of measurements from bones found in 1940, since lost, suggested a match to Earhart, many forensic anthropologists dispute these findings, arguing the original 1940 medical analysis concluded the remains were male. However, definitive proof connecting these items to Earhart has not been established through forensic analysis. Another theory proposes that Earhart and Noonan were captured by Japanese military forces after landing in territory controlled by Japan, with some variants suggesting they were accused of espionage and held in custody. This theory relies on anecdotal testimony from individuals claiming to have seen Earhart in Japanese custody, though no documentary evidence from Japanese military archives has been located to support these accounts. The United States government investigated these claims during the post-war period when access to Japanese records became available, but found no corroborating documentation. In January 2024, Deep Sea Vision released sonar images of an object on the ocean floor, roughly 16,000 feet deep, that bears a striking resemblance to Earhart's Lockheed Electra 10E, located approximately 100 miles from Howland Island. However, A 2025 follow-up expedition is required to confirm if the object is indeed her aircraft. Another aviation-related case would involve very different circumstances. Natalie Wood. On November 29, 1981, actress Natalie Wood was discovered deceased in the waters off Santa Catalina Island, California. She had been aboard a yacht named Splendor with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. The Los Angeles County coroner initially classified the incident as accidental drowning, with alcohol intoxication listed as a contributing factor. However, the circumstances surrounding how Wood entered the water generated questions that persisted for decades after her passing. Wood harbored a well-documented fear of water stemming from childhood experiences and predictions she had heard about drowning. This phobia made her voluntary entry into ocean waters during nighttime hours seem inconsistent with her established behavioral patterns. Medical examination documented bruises and abrasions on Wood's body, with some of these injuries appearing inconsistent with a simple fall from a boat. The presence and pattern of these bruises prompted forensic pathologists to question whether Wood had been involved in an altercation before entering the water. Wagner and Walken provided statements indicating they had engaged in a heated verbal disagreement during the evening, though both maintained the argument had not involved physical contact. Captain Davern later suggested in interviews that he had heard more intense confrontation than was initially reported to investigators, though his accounts shifted over the years, raising questions about the reliability of his recollections. The yacht's inflatable dinghy was found separated from the main vessel and drifting in the area where Wood's body was recovered, suggesting she may have attempted to secure it or board it before ending up in the water. In 2011, authorities reclassified the investigation from accidental death to suspicious circumstances, acknowledging that the bruising patterns and other evidence warranted renewed examination. This reclassification stemmed from advances in understanding how injuries appear on bodies recovered from water and from fresh analysis of the original autopsy photographs using contemporary forensic expertise. Robert Wagner was designated a person of interest in 2018, though he declined to provide additional statements to investigators beyond his original accounts from 1981. As of late 2025, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has not cleared Robert Wagner. While they acknowledged in 2022 that they had run out of leads, they explicitly stated he remains a person of interest, and the case stays open. Theories about what occurred range from Wood attempting to tie down or board the dinghy, and accidentally falling into the water while intoxicated, to Wood deliberately entering the water in a state of distress following arguments aboard the yacht, to scenarios involving more direct causation that led to her entry into the water. The lack of independent witnesses to the actual moment Wood entered the water prevents definitive reconstruction of events. The case remains technically open with an undetermined manner classification, acknowledging that while drowning was the immediate cause, the circumstances leading to drowning remain unclear. The next case would transform consumer safety regulations. The Chicago Tylenol murders. Between September 29th and October 1st, 1982, 7 individuals in the Chicago metropolitan area passed away after consuming extra-strength Tylenol capsules that had been laced with potassium cyanide. The victims experienced rapid onset of symptoms following ingestion, with cyanide poisoning causing death within hours or minutes. Medical examination established that the capsules had been tampered with, containing cyanide concentrations far exceeding lethal doses. The discovery that multiple unrelated individuals had been poisoned by the same product prompted immediate public health response and product recalls across the nation. The first victim was 12-year-old Mary Kellerman of Elk Grove Village, who died after taking a capsule for a cold. Later that day, 3 members of the Janus family also died after taking capsules from the same bottle. When family members also became ill after taking capsules from the same bottle, medical personnel recognized a poisoning pattern. Subsequent investigation revealed that bottles purchased from different retail locations contained contaminated capsules, indicating the tampering had occurred either during manufacturing, distribution, or at retail locations, rather than in a single household. The geographic spread of contaminated bottles across the Chicago area suggested either multiple tampering incidents or distribution of contaminated product through normal supply chain channels. Johnson & Johnson, the parent company of McNeil Consumer Products, which manufactured Tylenol, responded by recalling approximately 31 million bottles of the product nationwide, with an estimated retail value of $100 million. The company offered to exchange all Tylenol capsules consumers possessed for tablets, which were less susceptible to tampering. The crisis prompted the pharmaceutical and food industries to develop tamper-evident packaging, including sealed bottles with safety features that would indicate if products had been opened before purchase. Federal legislation mandating tamper-resistant packaging for over-the-counter medications followed within 2 years. Investigation efforts involved multiple law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, with hundreds of suspects interviewed and numerous theories pursued. James William Lewis emerged as a significant person of interest after sending a letter demanding payment to halt further poisoning incidents. Lewis was convicted of extortion related to the letter, but was never charged with the poisonings themselves, as investigators could not establish his presence in Chicago during the relevant time frame or connect him to the contaminated bottles through physical evidence. James William Lewis passed away in July 2023 at his home in Massachusetts, taking any secrets he may have had to the grave. Despite his death, the FBI conducted fresh DNA tests on his personal belongings in 2024, though no public link to the Chicago crime scenes has been established. The motive for the tampering has never been definitively established. Theories range from an individual seeking to cause random harm to someone with a grievance against Johnson & Johnson or the pharmaceutical industry, to a perpetrator who had intended to target a specific victim but created multiple contaminated bottles to disguise the intended target. The lack of additional tampering incidents after the initial outbreak and recall suggested either the perpetrator achieved their objective through the initial poisonings or was deterred by the massive law enforcement response and public attention the case generated. Recent documentary examinations and advanced DNA testing of evidence have been conducted as forensic capabilities have evolved, though no breakthrough leading to charges has been announced. The bottles and capsules were handled by numerous individuals during manufacturing, distribution, retail display, and purchase, complicating efforts to identify which DNA profiles might belong to the perpetrator versus innocent parties in the supply chain. The case remains officially unsolved, with the FBI maintaining an open investigation and encouraging anyone with information to come forward. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Some mysteries would remain unsolved even when victims could be found. The Beaumont children. On January 26, 1966, 3 siblings departed their family residence in Somerton Park, South Australia, to spend the day at Glenelg Beach. The outing was routine, with the group having made similar trips to the beach on previous occasions without incident. Multiple witnesses observed the siblings during the morning and afternoon hours in the company of a tall, thin man with fair hair, who appeared to be engaging with them in activities on the beach and purchasing food for them. The siblings were expected to return home by bus in the early afternoon, but failed to arrive at the anticipated time. Parents Jim and Nancy Beaumont initially assumed the children had missed their intended bus and would return on a subsequent service. However, as afternoon progressed into evening without their return, Concern escalated and authorities were notified. The investigation that commenced immediately involved extensive searches of the beach area, surrounding neighborhoods and waterways. Witnesses who had observed the children during the day provided descriptions of the unidentified man, creating a composite profile of someone appearing to be in his 30s or 40s, standing approximately 6 feet tall, with a thin build and sun-tanned skin. The witness accounts indicated the man had been observed playing with the siblings in the water and on the sand, purchasing meat pies and beverages for them at a shop, and engaging in what appeared to be friendly interaction. One particularly significant observation involved the siblings using changing facilities at the beach, with the man reportedly waiting outside, suggesting a level of familiarity and trust that would allow them to go with this individual without apparent distress. The expenditure of money by the siblings on food and activities exceeded what their parents had provided, leading investigators to conclude the man had given them additional funds. The investigation expanded rapidly, with searches conducted across South Australia and into other states. Despite one of the largest missing persons investigations in Australian history, no trace of the siblings or definitive evidence regarding their fate has been located. The case generated numerous theories and supposed sightings, with witnesses claiming to have seen individuals matching the descriptions in various locations, though none of these reports led to recovery of the siblings. Several suspects have been investigated throughout the decades. Bevan Spencer von Einem, who was later convicted of unrelated offenses, drew attention after informants claimed he had made statements about the Beaumont case. Arthur Stanley Brown, who had connections to the Glenelg area in 1966, was also examined as a potential person of interest. However, neither individual has been definitively linked to the disappearance through physical evidence or confession. In February 2025, a privately funded search led by MP Frank Pangallo targeted the former Castalloy Foundry in North Plympton. While the week-long dig initially discovered a 2-meter-long pit and various bone fragments, the South Australia Police confirmed in March 2025 that the remains were not human, once again leaving the case without a forensic breakthrough. The disappearance profoundly impacted Australian society, fundamentally altering parental attitudes toward children traveling unsupervised and playing in public spaces. The marriage of Jim and Nancy Beaumont did not survive the strain of the disappearance, with the couple separating in subsequent years. The case remains open with South Australia Police, with authorities maintaining that any information, regardless of how much time has passed, should be reported for investigation. The next case would occur in a family home on a holiday morning. JonBenét Ramsey. On December 26, 1996, the body of a young individual was discovered in the basement of a residence in Boulder, Colorado. The family had reported finding a ransom note earlier that morning, demanding payment for the safe return of the individual. The note, written on paper from a pad found within the residence, demanded $118,000, which happened to approximate the value of a recent bonus received by the father through his business activities. The letter included specific instructions about delivery of funds and threats about consequences if authorities were contacted. Though the family had immediately notified police upon discovering the note, medical examination determined the cause of passing to be strangulation by means of a garrote device fashioned from cord and a wooden handle, combined with a skull fracture. The sequence of injuries and the time between the skull fracture and strangulation became subjects of forensic debate, with experts disagreeing about which injury occurred first and whether both were inflicted by the same individual. Evidence indicated the victim had eaten pineapple shortly before passing, though family members provided conflicting accounts about when and how this food had been consumed. The crime scene presented numerous anomalies that complicated investigation. The ransom note's length and content struck investigators as unusual, with the document extending to 3 pages and including phrases that seemed inconsistent with typical kidnapping demands. The note was written in the home rather than prepared in advance, suggesting either lack of planning or staging. The basement window showed signs of disturbance, with broken glass and displaced items. Though forensic analysis could not definitively establish whether entry or exit through this opening had occurred on the night of the incident or at an earlier time. DNA evidence recovered from the victim's clothing identified genetic material from an unknown male individual who did not match any family members or known associates. This DNA has been entered into national databases but has not generated matches to known offenders. The presence of this unidentified DNA has been interpreted by some investigators as supporting an intruder theory, while others have questioned the significance of trace DNA that could have been transferred to the clothing through secondary contact during manufacturing or handling. The investigation initially focused substantial attention on family members, with both parents and the sibling facing intense scrutiny from law enforcement and media. In 2008, the Boulder County District Attorney issued a formal apology to the family and stated that DNA evidence had cleared them of involvement. However, public debate about family involvement has persisted, with competing theories continuing to circulate in true crime communities and media coverage. In December 2025, Boulder Police Chief Stephen Redfearn confirmed that dozens of items from the crime scene, some never before tested, are currently undergoing advanced DNA sequencing at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. John Ramsey has publicly urged the use of forensic genetic genealogy, FGG, calling it the gold standard for finally identifying the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. But some cases would involve victims whose very identity remained unknown for decades. The Isdal woman. On November 29, 1970, hikers discovered burned human remains in Norway's Isdalen Valley, a remote location accessible only by hiking trail. The body had been positioned among rocks in an area known locally for its isolation and difficult terrain. Evidence at the scene included empty bottles that had contained a sedative medication and additional bottles containing a flammable liquid. The positioning of the body and the presence of these materials led investigators to consider both self-inflicted passing and staged scene scenarios. Medical examination determined the individual had consumed a fatal dose of sleeping medication and had also been exposed to carbon monoxide, with burns having occurred while the individual was still alive. The extent of the burns and the consumption of the medication complicated efforts to establish a definitive sequence of events. Personal identifying materials, including jewelry and labels from clothing, had been removed, suggesting deliberate effort to prevent identification. Fingerprints had been erased through the burning process, further hindering identification efforts. Investigation of hotel records revealed the individual had traveled through Norway and other European countries, using multiple false identities documented in passports found among belongings. The passports bore different names but contained photographs of the same individual, indicating sophisticated identity falsification. Hotel registration cards were filled out in codes that investigators could not fully decipher, and the individual had checked luggage at a train station that contained additional coded notes and multiple wigs. The wigs suggested attempts to alter appearance, consistent with someone seeking to avoid recognition or surveillance. Witness accounts from hotel staff and other travelers described the individual as polyglot, capable of conversing in multiple languages, including German, French, and Flemish, with some observers noting what they characterized as a Balkan or Eastern European accent. The linguistic abilities and the pattern of international travel led investigators to consider possibilities, including espionage activities, though no definitive evidence of intelligence work has been located. Several witnesses reported observing men following or meeting with the individual at various locations during the weeks before the body was discovered. though these men were never identified. Isotope analysis of dental work and bone composition suggested the individual had been born in approximately 1930 in the region near Nuremberg, Germany, and had potentially relocated to France at some point during childhood or adolescence. The dental work exhibited characteristics of European practices from the mid-20th century. However, attempts to match the dental records to missing persons reports from Germany and France produced no definitive identifications. In 2023 and 2024, a widely circulated theory published in Neue Zürcher Zeitung proposed that the Isdal woman was a Palestinian operative financed by Swiss banker François Genoux. This theory aligns with her frequent travel, use of Belgian aliases, and the presence of coded notebooks, suggesting she was a courier rather than a traditional spy. The question of whether the passing was self-inflicted or caused by others has never been conclusively resolved. The case remains officially unsolved, with the individual's identity still unknown despite decades of investigation and modern forensic techniques. Another case from an earlier era would shock a small American community. Villisca Axe Murders. On the morning of June 10, 1912, a neighbor discovered 8 individuals deceased inside a residence in Villisca, Iowa. The victims included 6 family members and 2 overnight guests, all having been struck with an axe while sleeping during the nighttime hours. The scene indicated the perpetrator had moved methodically through the residence, attacking each victim in their beds with blows to the head. While the strikes were exceptionally brutal, the victims were identified by their positions in their respective beds and the clothing they wore, as the perpetrator had used the blunt side of the axe for most of the fatal blows, followed by the sharp edge. The family was well established in the Villisca community, active in local church activities and maintaining a prominent position in the small town's social structure. The father operated a successful business, and the family was regarded as affluent by local standards. The overnight guests were siblings who had attended a church event with the family earlier that evening and had been invited to stay rather than walking home in darkness. The fact that 2 additional individuals were present in the residence that night suggested the attack may have been opportunistic rather than specifically planned around the family's typical household composition. Physical evidence at the scene included the murder weapon, an axe belonging to the family that had been taken from the property and used in the attacks. After completing the attacks, the perpetrator had left the axe in a downstairs room rather than taking it from the premises or disposing of it elsewhere. Windows throughout the residence had been covered with clothing and curtains, suggesting the perpetrator wanted to prevent observation from outside while conducting the attacks or afterward. A lamp had been left burning in the downstairs area, though most of the residence was dark. Evidence suggested the perpetrator had remained in the residence for a period after the attacks, possibly concealing in the attic space during the nighttime hours and departing only after daylight. A bowl of water containing blood dilution had been found in the kitchen, indicating the perpetrator had attempted to wash after the attacks. Traces suggesting the perpetrator had consumed food from the kitchen were also documented, demonstrating a level of comfort remaining in the residence that struck investigators as unusual. The primary suspect who faced trial was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling minister who had been in Villisca on the evening of the attacks. Kelly had attended the same church event as the family and had been observed leaving town on a train early the following morning. His behavior in subsequent weeks, including making statements about the case to various individuals, drew investigative attention. Kelly faced trial twice for the offenses, with the first trial ending in hung jury and the second producing an acquittal. The evidence against him was largely circumstantial, based on opportunity and subsequent suspicious behavior, rather than physical evidence linking him to the scene. Alternative theories connected the Villisca attacks to a series of similar axe-related family attacks that occurred in the Midwest and other regions during the same general time frame. Investigators focused on Henry Lee Moore, who was convicted of murdering his mother and grandmother with an axe in 1912. And modern profilers often link the Villisca crimes to the man from the train theory, which suggests a serial killer traveled the rails, committing dozens of similar axe murders across the US and Canada between 1911 and 1912. The case remains officially unsolved, representing one of Iowa's most notorious cold cases from the early 20th century. A modern case would demonstrate how vehicles could provide both evidence and questions. Maura Murray. On February 9, 2004, a vehicle was discovered abandoned on a roadside in Haverhill, New Hampshire, following a single-vehicle collision. The driver's door was left ajar, with damage to the vehicle consistent with striking a tree or snowbank, though the collision appeared relatively minor. A local bus driver who lived nearby had observed the vehicle shortly after the collision and offered assistance to a woman at the scene, who told the bus driver, Butch Atwood, not to call the police because she had already called AAA. A statement Atwood found suspicious, as there was no cell phone reception in that specific dead zone of the White Mountains. The bus driver notified authorities and returned to his residence, with the entire interaction lasting only minutes. When law enforcement arrived approximately 10 to 15 minutes after the bus driver's call, the scene was empty, with no individual present at or near the vehicle. The driver had departed on foot, though the direction taken could not be definitively established. Personal belongings remained in the vehicle, including directions to Burlington, Vermont, alcohol containers showing evidence of recent spillage, and a damaged cell phone. The vehicle belonged to the missing individual's father and had been in the driver's possession for several days prior to the collision. Investigation revealed that the individual had left college abruptly earlier that week, sending email messages to instructors and supervisors indicating a family emergency required absence. However, family members later confirmed no such emergency existed, and the stated reason for departure appeared to have been fabricated. The individual had withdrawn most of the available balance from a bank account, purchased alcohol, and driven north from the college area into New Hampshire, though the intended destination and purpose of the trip remained unclear. The individual had been experiencing various stressors in the period before disappearance, including academic pressures related to nursing studies, complications in personal relationships, and recent involvement in minor legal matters related to unauthorized use of another person's credit card information. Some family members and investigators theorized the individual might have been seeking solitude or escape from these various pressures, possibly intending to spend time in a rented accommodation in a remote area. However, no confirmed reservations or destinations could be located through investigation of financial records or communications. The bus driver who interacted with the individual at the crash scene described the driver as appearing uninjured, though potentially shaken or distressed. The conversation was brief and cordial, with the driver declining assistance but not displaying obvious signs of extreme distress or fear. This account has led to theories that the individual may have voluntarily departed the area on foot, either with someone known or through hitchhiking, rather than encountering harm immediately at the crash scene. In late 2024 and throughout 2025, the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit utilized advanced ground-penetrating radar on a specific parcel of land in Llandaff, NH. Following a tip regarding a local resident, rather than a transient, with a history of violence, though the search concluded in September 2025 without the discovery of remains. This person of interest had a history of concerning behavior and had been in the general area during February 2004, though no physical evidence directly linking this individual to the case has been announced. The lead represented renewed investigative focus after years of various theories and tips that produced no breakthrough. Family members, particularly the father, have maintained active advocacy for continued investigation, conducting independent searches and keeping public attention on the case through media engagement. The combination of the unexplained departure from college, the crash scene abandonment, and the complete absence of confirmed sightings or communication